everyone. Welcome back to Small Town on Purpose. I'm Ashley Barnett, and this is my lovely husband, Jason.
Hey-o.
Today, we are continuing our conversation about how theology shapes us. This is part numero dos. Today we're talking about the Sabbath. How do we make decisions about the Sabbath? How do we spend it? What do we not do on the Sabbath? Should we even consider the Sabbath? Is it something that Christians should still do? Our theology, and Reformed Theology specifically, speaks to that. And so that's what we're talking about today. Okay, Jason, so what is the Sabbath? Or how would you define Sabbath? What does it mean?
So Sabbath is, I think it's defined as rest, but what we see as the Sabbath is in Scripture that it goes all the way back to being a creation ordinance.
Okay.
Back in Genesis, when God was creating the earth, we hear on the seventh day he rested.
So what does that mean? He rested, like he stopped from working. So the first 6 days,
Right.
He created different things at different times. And then on the 7th day, he stopped working and he rested.
He rested in the sense that he wasn't like tired or like kaput from doing, because
God doesn't get tired.
God doesn't get tired. It's just that all was good.
Yeah.
And so he was sitting in enjoyment, or enjoying what he had created, and finding rest is like finding enjoyment in that.
Yeah. So he had completed his work. And then on the 7th day, it was good. And so he got to rest and enjoy what he had created.
Correct.
Okay.
Fast forward a little bit with Moses, and you get into the 10 Commandments that God then gives in the 10 Commandments, number 4, to Israel, and says,
The 4th commandment.
The 4th commandment, and says, hey, Israel, you keep the Sabbath holy.
Keep the day holy.
Right. Keep it holy. And he's instituting this law to his people as like a gift to them.
Yeah.
So now they, who do get tired, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Are working the 6 days of the week.
The first 6 days.
The first 6 days. And then on the 7th day, they can rest.
For a full 24 hours.
Right.
I like how you described it as a gift.
Right.
Like he's not, the other 10 commandments, they're really hard to keep. Like,
this one's hard to keep too.
But it's like resting, and we all can like agree, like, what a great gift. Like, out of all the rules God gave us, like, don't murder, don't cheat, don't lie, like, rest.
Sorry, Mom, I can't clean my room. I'm Sabbathing.
Right? And you think that it would be something that would be easy to keep. And I mean, us as the like self-care generation, especially, like, you feel like that is like...
Ooh, can we get into that later on a different video?
Self-care generation? Yeah. Don't you dare take away my self-care, brother. I promise you. Not that I'm great at doing it, but... And so the Israelites, like, sucked bad at keeping the Sabbath. It wasn't like, they were great at it. No, they really... And they got in a lot of trouble from the Lord, from God, for breaking the Sabbath.
Right. Because in the Old Testament, it wasn't just keep my day holy. There was a lot of other things that went along with how do you actually do rest. Like, no treading grain, or you're not doing this kind of work on the Sabbath. Yeah. And there's a whole long list of things.
Yeah, but like there's a Pharisaical way, like how the Pharisees, like... Yes. Like they had rules around rules, like to keep you 100 feet away from actually breaking the Sabbath, right?
Sounds like a lot of work.
Sounds like it was a lot of work, and it became a burden to the people of Israel. Yes. So then by the time Jesus is on the scene, you're not even allowed to help sick people or hurt people on the Sabbath, or the Sabbath that the Pharisees began to impose on the people was a huge burden.
Fast forwarding now to the Sabbath when Jesus comes onto the scene, right, in the New Testament, how the Sabbath isn't distinctly mentioned out of all the 10 Commandments,
right? In the New Testament.
It's talked about.
Like
but
Jesus talks about, he specifically mentions all of the 10 commandments except number 4, the Sabbath.
He talks about it.
But he doesn't like reiterate.
Right. Reiterate like it
as a law, as a command.
Right.
Which some people take as, well, then there's no more Sabbath, which the Westminster Confession of Faith, the Reformed tradition, the Reformed tradition of theology would say there is a Sabbath in the New Testament.
Yes. And that there is a specific day that's been set apart to have this Sabbath rest.
Yeah.
We would agree that the Sabbath rest is on a
Not
Sunday.
New Testament. I don't like saying New Testament Christians. We're New Covenant Christians.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Sorry, I went back to what I was thinking. I didn't even listen to it.
That's okay. All right.
Yeah. Sorry.
Anyways.
So in the New Covenant, in the New Testament, we see that there is a Lord's Day given to us. How is that connected to, or the same as, or difference? What's the difference between the Lord's Day and the Sabbath?
More like Sabbath rest and the Lord's Day. We're just saying that for us, the Lord's Day is our Sabbath. It's our Sabbath rest day, our 24 hours. The Lord's Day is the day in which all Christians or all saints have been commanded to assemble.
To gather for worship.
Like Marvel. Like the Avengers. Saints assemble.
Okay.
No?
Yeah.
That's what I think of.
All right.
And that happens to be now the first day of the week.
Yes.
So Sunday, no longer the last day of the week. And the reason it switched to Sunday is because when Christ rose from the grave, it was on a Sunday.
It was on the first day of the week.
Right. You see Christians assembling on Sunday. The
Paul
first day
talks
of the
about
week.
it in Acts.
Acts, 1 Corinthians, you see it in Revelation.
Revelation 1.
Right.
Where the Lord's Day is the day that now Christians are gathering for worship. Where they're praying, where they're taking communion, where, what else are they doing? Eating at each other's houses. You see hospitality.
Acts of mercy.
Acts of mercy.
Right.
It's a solely Christian thing that's happening on Sundays.
Right.
And so the Westminster Confession of Faith, if you're interested in looking at it, it's question 59, and it talks about which day of the
larger catechism.
Of the larger catechism. It says, which day of the 7 has God appointed to be the weekly Sabbath? And so it talks about how it's on Sunday and why it's on Sunday now. And they give proof texts from Genesis 2 and Acts 20 that talk about why this new day,
from
this
creation
Sabbath.
To also assembling of the saints.
Yes, it takes us from creation. It's a creation ordinance. And then we see in Acts that it's being reconstituted as a Sabbath day of rest and worship on Sundays. So the Westminster Confession and Scripture, of course, because the Westminster Confession. I know I have to keep iterating that because I know there are people like, why are they getting this from some extra biblical document? Well,
I still don't think anybody says that.
They do.
At least the one. Okay. That's
they
true.
Absolutely do.
That's true. Go ahead. I'm listening.
So now question 60 in the Westminster Confession says, how is the Sabbath to be sanctified? And it answers itself. Playing ball, snow fighting. What? That's not correct. That's not the answer.
Those were my notes.
That's extra biblical. Okay.
It also says going to theme parks and
buying his wife all kinds of nice things.
Nope, that's not in there.
Okay.
No.
So how is the Sabbath to be sanctified then, Jason?
It talks about not doing recreation on the Sabbath.
Who says that?
So Westminster Confession of Faith will outline it and says, where does it say, the Sabbath is to be sanctified by a holy resting all that day, even from such worldly, that's a hard word. Worldly,
it's not actually. Worldly
employments and recreations.
Oh, so the Westminster Confession says we can't do recreational stuff like play ball, like do sports, like play music.
Well, so that's the fun part,
read books.
Because there's like two different like camps here.
In the Reformed tradition?
Well, yes, you got like the puritanical view, and then they call the other one
the continental view.
Oh, how did you know?
I read your notes earlier.
Oh, okay. Yes, the puritanical. I can't speak.
I think you're having trouble with your R's.
Maybe. I used to say purple when I was little. I couldn't say purple.
Okay.
I don't know if I can still
So
say
the
it.
puritanical view
Right.
is like nothing's fun. Don't do anything. That's literally, I think,
Or
what's in
maybe
their
the Puritan
creed.
view. And the
Like, what is fun?
continental-
Nothing.
And the continental view that talks about more of like you can do more recreation.
Yeah.
Like if you're going on a walk or riding a bicycle, there, you know, I heard something from R.C. Sproul who said he had heard a story that one day John Knox had showed up and John Calvin was playing yard bowling on the Sabbath as a form of recreation. Don't know if that's actually true, but I thought that was hilarious because
And Calvin was like,
no, Calvin was playing yard bowling.
I know, and it was John Knox like,
Well, I didn't get that far into
his
it.
knickers got in a twist.
Well, you know. Anyways,
Not that you all know who John Knox or John Calvin are.
you
Because
should
that's
if you
like,
watched part 1.
Like, that's like
I
so.
think we
and
talked about it.
That's so like in the weeds of these Reformed old dudes. They're all dead, by the way. But they all have great things to say. In terms of sanctifying and keeping the Sabbath holy,
Yes.
there are a general consensus on what we should do and what we should not do, depending on which camp you are.
Westminster talks about, you know, we should be spending the Sabbath, or our Lord's Day for us, and being the Sabbath in worship, right?
Like, what should we do to keep it
private
holy?
and public worship.
Yeah.
Right? We should be doing things only out of necessity
Like what?
and mercy.
Like what's necessity?
Necessity.
Eating?
Eating is important.
Okay.
Yes. Remember, Jesus talks about the animal falling in a hole. Like if your animal or cow or something falls in a hole, why would you not pull it out? I feel like that resonates on the farm. If I had some animal stuck in a gate or
ditch,
fence
we'd
or a
wanna
ditch
save
or
it.
something, I've got to help it, right? It's an
Yeah.
act of necessity. And then acts of mercy. And that we'll see that. And so Sundays are a great time to actually serve in your community, serve your brothers and sisters in your church, have people over for hospitalities.
Hospitality is like a meal.
Hospitality.
We're going to have hospitalities today.
Oh, wow. But then also like acts of mercy. And that's where I was going to get into like snowball fights.
Oh, that makes more sense.
Like I could have a snowball fight on Sunday when it was very snowy.
Yeah, it's true. Not if you're Puritan, though.
Not if I was Puritan.
No fun on Sundays.
It being an act of mercy and necessity, and that I'm being a good father.
Yes.
Building relationships with my children.
Yeah, by throwing cold balls of snow at their face.
It's good. It's a building.
That's
opportunity,
convenient.
Right? Yeah, it's an act of necessity. I'm fathering.
Okay, so that makes sense. So there are some good things to do to sanctify or make that day holy, and it's to do, to go to church and worship, to do things that are necessary, like eating, any emergency care or care for your animals, but I'm thinking, what's an equivalent of that to people who don't live like they're in the 16th century like us?
Grocery shopping.
Grocery shopping, is that a necessity? You can do
No.
that any other day of the week.
No, I thought you were asking what was.
No, like
Sorry.
no, like
I think that's an argument though. Like I find myself having to go to the grocery store on Sundays as I'm like, oh, it's 3:00 or 4:00 and I got to get all my groceries so I can prepare for the whole week. Right?
Instead of going on Saturday.
Right. I would tell myself, well, this is an act of necessity because I need to we have to eat.
Yeah.
But in reality,
You could do that work on a
probably
Sunday.
could do that on Saturday.
So that you could spend more time in worship,
Throwing snowballs at my
throwing
kids.
snowballs at your kids,
Right.
doing acts of mercy, and rejoicing in the Lord. I think that's the thing, is sanctifying and making it holy is setting apart and making it different than every other day.
Yes. Yes. I would agree with that.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I said it, so it makes sense to me.
Okay.
Okay, so what are we not to do on the Sabbath? What is forbidden? That's what the next question in the Westminster Confession asks. What is forbidden in the fourth commandment? That's such a Presbyterian forbidden.
I think for myself,
Okay.
not doing our day-to-day labor. So for me, that would be my email checking during the day.
Because you work at home, like an office remote job.
Correct. I mean, everybody's probably got a lot more access to emails and stuff now because you can have
Yes.
laptops and take
We
them
have
home.
so much more access to our daily jobs anyways. It's not like you haul off to the factory every day and can't now because it's a Sunday. No, it's so much more tempting. It's like Think about 50 years ago, 60 years ago.
A lot
You
of people
couldn't
still
bring
haul
your...
off to the factory. What are you talking about?
No, I'm saying if it's closed. I mean, 60, 70 years ago, it was closed
like
on
blue
Sundays.
laws, I think is what they were
Yes,
called.
they were closed on Sundays. It's not like you
Yeah.
could bring that job home with you. Now, if
Correct.
you were a lawyer or if you were an on-call doctor or something, I think now a lot more people have jobs where they are on all the time, where you're constantly working in some capacity, online school, on remote jobs, that type of stuff.
And you make a good point, like on-call doctors and stuff like that. I would consider that an act of necessity.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? Like you do get called in to work on weekends.
What are you going to just let me have my leg broken because it's the Sabbath? Yeah. No.
Back then, probably. Back in the day.
Yeah, that is correct.
In my line of work, if you're a system administrator, people like their websites to stay up over the weekend, right? And so system administrators that are on call when servers and stuff go down, even in the digital world, you don't have to be, bandaging somebody.
Yeah. Now we're
All
bandaging
works
the
of
internet.
Necessities.
Internet.
Necessities.
Internet.
Necessities. Wow. It's one of the things in the larger catechism says what you're not supposed to do is profaning the day by idleness.
Why are you asking me?
No.
Because I struggle with idleness?
No, because you're better at defining words.
Because I'm better at idleness than you?
No.
Yeah, it's true. I am better at idleness than he is. He's never idle.
I'm sitting here.
Idleness is when you're like doing nothing. You're sitting and just kind of being lazy. And so, yeah, the Westminster Confession does talk about idleness as something that you're not to do on the Sabbath. Which
What would that look like, though? Like, I was trying to think through what would it look like on a Sunday. So, like, I love watching Bond movies.
Yeah.
And
you can watch a movie on Sundays.
Right. But what would it be considered idleness?
So, let's take your Bond thing, for example.
Okay.
Let's say, or football, or TikTok, or gaming, or what's something that you do by yourself where you just sit for a long period of time.
Like binge?
And not do anything. Yes. That's what I'm thinking, like binging. Or reading a book for hours and hours. All of those things.
It's the Bible.
Like all of those things, there's nothing wrong with any of those things. But where it comes into idleness is where you're like, okay, I'm going to church today. I'm going to check that off my box. I'm going to go home and I am going to watch Bond movies all day. I'm going to put myself on the bed or on my couch and I'm going to binge watch all day. And I don't have to worry about this is my rest. I'm not doing anything else. And, that verges on slothfulness, laziness, and you're not worshiping. It's all for your own self-gain and for your own personal enjoyment. And it's not really setting the day apart for worship, for enjoying the acts of mercy, the creation that God has given you. Like if you're someone who likes to watch football on Sundays and you are just like so excited to get home every single Sunday in the fall and winter to watch football all day, it's problematic. But if you say, hey, you know what? I'm going to use this opportunity to invite my friends over to watch. The point is not to be idle, but to be thoughtful about your Sabbath and to consider it and to set it apart. You being thoughtful in how you want to spend this day enjoying creation that God has given you and worshiping Him, then I think you're kind of on the right trajectory. But if it is just for self-gratification, a day of self-entertainment and doing what I want to do, then I think you're kind of merging into idleness. And then the other thing that's forbidden.
Oh gosh, so much forbidden. Okay.
Is refusing to worship and gather in worship.
Oh.
As if you're like, I slept a little late, or the game comes on early today, and you are refusing to gather, then that's, a refusal to set apart the Sabbath as holy. Yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Or a statement. I think it's also important when we talk about doing in-home services for folks who can't make it on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
I remember in our old church, I had the privilege of being able to go and have a small service.
Yes.
With our pastors and deacons, right? With folks that are elderly that couldn't actually make it to church, that were in a senior community home.
Yeah.
And
we call those are called shut-ins, people who are shut in at home and who can't physically leave for whatever reason.
And so we were doing that on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Right?
So they take church to them.
And that was amazing, and it was great, and we'd actually have a service and a small homily, and we would do the Lord's Supper, and that was an act of mercy and I think necessity, and it was allowing folks to gather in on the Lord's Day and worship.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
It was a lot of fun, and I think the kids enjoyed it too.
Yeah, the kids would go with you, and the one of the women that they'd go to do a small service with, she was 101 years old, just belting out, what was it? The old rugged cross in her assisted living. And it was just always just brought me to tears that this woman, 101 years old, just beautiful. Loving and resting in the Lord. Really beautiful to see. Yes. So, okay, that's all great. That's like all the theology, like our video is almost already done. Are we going to need a part 3? I hope not.
We're not.
This is going to get done today.
Editing magic.
You are the editing magician.
Yeah.
So this leads us to, how does the Sabbath, or how does our theology inform or impact our daily lives? Well, what we know and believe about the Sabbath is going to affect our decisions that we make on Sunday for ourselves and for our kids. And so we have a situation with Ruby and cheerleading. Do you want to explain what that is?
So we briefly talked about it in the last episode. You know, for us, my big thing is wanting to build community in our community and get engaged with folks and start meeting folks since our church is so far away. I was excited to do that through cheerleading or some of these organized things. However, the cheerleading that Ruby would be doing falls on a Sunday afternoon.
The games she'd be cheering
at. And since we are so far away to get to church and get back, most likely you or I would miss some portion of church. Not to mention that it would just be ridiculously probably exhausting to get there, get back. And not to mention that, we've also prioritized Sundays to spend time with church family, community, up in the area that we go to church and
worshiping and resting.
And worshiping and resting on Sundays. And it kind of impacts all of that.
And when I think of the decision is, anything that we do on Sundays, is it restorative? Does it restore us, rejuvenate us, or does it bog us down and make us tired? For me, activities for the kids, we do those throughout the week and they aren't restorative for us. We're not a sports family, so this would be like the first sport that our kid does.
Right.
We've done music, and so piano lessons or piano concerts or school things, they've never fallen on a Sunday. However, if our boys want to do marching band and all of the games and all of the performances were on Sunday, would we say no to marching band?
Yeah.
That's a big part of our life.
Yeah.
That would be a really hard decision to make. And I think ultimately, the Bible isn't going to say, thou shalt not do marching band on Sundays. No. But what we understand and believe and how we live our life is going to impact the decision we make for Sundays.
What if you wanted to go out to eat and go shopping on Sundays? And our kids are always wanting to play video games on Sundays. What about those things?
Because everybody's life is different and the work that they're engaged in during the week. So my week, I'm home. I don't go shopping a lot. I don't do a lot of grocery shopping. However, I've always had a conscience that's like, I'm making someone else work on a Sunday. And Sundays are one of the busiest days for shopping and restaurants. Why? Because a lot of Christians go shopping on Sundays. And a lot of the secular culture loves it too. Sure. But I think what an impact it would be if Christians thoughtfully, thought about, maybe I won't go shopping today, or maybe I'll do that on Saturdays and I'll do something a little bit more restorative. But that's not to say if you go shopping on Sundays with your daughter to spend time with her, or your son, or you go out to eat for a family, that could be rejuvenating.
Okay, so I have another question for you.
You sure about that?
I do. I know. Usually you're asking me questions, but this.
I like this. I like it.
So where we were before, you worked at our church.
Where we lived before.
Where we lived before, used to work at our church. And so your job would also have a lot of demands on a Sunday sometimes, or we were a lot more actively engaged in
ministry
and the things that were happening at church. And so I think about like ministers and stuff and Sabbathing on Sundays. are
It's hard.
yeah.
It's hard. Let the reader understand.
Reader?
Let the listener the hearer understand. Sundays are incredibly hard for a lot of pastors and their families and ministry leaders. Take it easy on them. Pastors work much more than just Sundays. And they spend all week preparing the liturgy, the music, the word that is being preached. And oftentimes the only emails they get are, I didn't like that. Why did you say that? I can't believe you did it that way.
Not to mention they're actually pastoring during the week.
And not
too.
to mention they're also meeting with people and caring for the sick and the hurting. Right. And if you have, they're there for you, right? Okay, but so that's the caveat. A lot of pastors and a lot of ministry staff will, because they work on Sundays, they'll take either Monday to Sabbath, or they'll take, after church on Sunday and then go full 24 hours into Monday and Sabbath to get their rest. If you're in ministry, try to not schedule tons of meetings on Sundays. I think looking back, I would have done a lot less of that. A lot of people, if they're really involved in the church, their whole week, they do a lot for the church during the week. And I think it's okay to say, you know what? Come and worship and fellowship and enjoy. I think that I think people get worried that we're going to be too legalistic about Sunday. I don't think that's the problem. I think we are far swung on the other side where we don't think about or care about Sundays enough. And so I think that there is wisdom in stopping on the first day of the week, as spelled out for us in Scripture, and giving people in ministry rest. Like good restorative rest.
We were pretty involved in Sunday morning worship, like logistics of the liturgy.
Yeah.
Having interviews afterwards for new members after going through the Sunday, and trying to meet and care for folks. And as a Christian, you're having folks over to your house and you're doing hospitality on Sunday. Even though you're watching the football game, you might be getting up and helping folks do stuff and get food. And
it's a lot.
It just can be very exhausting on a Sunday when doing these things that are supposed to bring us rest. And I remember looking at neighbors back in the day.
Back when we had neighbors.
who didn't go to church, and their Sundays always looked very restful.
Yes, that is for sure.
Where it's like, I'm ready for a nap.
Yes. Yes, you come back from church and you're like ready to crash.
And I just wonder, how do we enter into that as Christians? Like, are we redefining the word rest on a Sunday, or actually digging into the definition of rest?
This is a super leading question. I love that. I mean, you know where you want to go with this,
do.
and I'm loving it.
Hopefully you know where I want you to go with it.
I do. I think I answered the question incorrectly before. I still think I was right, but
okay.
I think where you're going is good and interesting, because I think we started this conversation out saying that God gave us rest because it's good for us.
It's good.
Because he knows that we need it. We need rest, and it's a good gift. But often I think and I'm sure a lot of you, look at Sundays as a burden. Like it's a huge burden now I have to go to church, and if I'm involved at church, now I got to go early to help set up communion, or I have to be a greeter, or I have to go to this meeting after church, right, or I have to lead youth group on Sunday nights. It can feel burdensome. Oh, now I have to invite the new people over to my house for lunch today, or I'm hosting this today. It is exhausting and hard. And I think what you're talking about, I love how you describe this, is are Christians redefining what rest is? Because the culture is like an idleness, an idle resting of binging,
TikTok
doing what I want.
Replay, repeat.
TikTok on repeat, yes. Yeah. How do we redefine or reclaim, I guess, rest? And what does Christian Sabbath rest look like? And how is it different from the culture's rest?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two parts, right? One is we should be looking at how busy we are on Sundays, and trying to figure out, do we need to be that busy? Like within church, like you were saying, do I need to have these meetings on this Sunday? I think COVID brought that to a brilliant right up in front of our faces, where no one could do anything.
We're like, oh crap, we really were kind of too busy.
We're pretty busy doing stuff, right? And so I think it's okay to evaluate your schedule, where you need to be on a Sunday. The second piece is leaning into Jesus's rest. And what does that look like for you? You know, we are called to serve other folks on the
on the Sabbath.
On the Sabbath throughout the week. We are called to hospitality.
We're called to love people on the Sabbath.
Doing acts of mercy just doesn't mean giving money to someone. It can be exhausting, but there's joy and fulfillment in what you're doing, you know, as a Christian on the Sabbath. And I think that can be restful, just like what we talked about at the beginning. When God rested, he was finding enjoyment and all that was good. And for us, it should be Jesus and all that is good.
Yeah, I mean, I can be tempted to define Sabbath rest as self-gratification, just all for me, what I need, what I can get out of it. And Jesus said that the Sabbath is not for God, but for man. It is for man, and it is for us to take a rest and to stop. But it is different than being idle and just completely slothful and just doing whatever you want. I mean, the Sabbath rest is a thoughtful rest. It is a rest that considers God and his creation and his kingdom and his people, loving them and enjoying them. And I think the more that we think about that, the better.
Real quick before we end, there was this guy Huffman on the Gospel Coalition that I was reading, and he said, I believe it was, the principle of weaving regular Christ-centered rest into our schedule is a piece of peculiarly divine brilliance. And I like that. And for me, it's me having to think about what does Christ-centered rest mean day to day.
So we hope that you will consider Sabbath rest. And what does that mean? If it's something that you've never considered, how should you start and begin to think about it? Read some scripture. Read the book of Acts and see how the apostles and the new church began to set it up, or what Paul says about it in 1 Corinthians. There are tons of resources out there about the Sabbath. And if you have thought about it and it's kind of fallen to the wayside, or if it's something that you don't really think is that important, I'd suggest start thinking about it. I think that it's good for us to consider the rest that God has given us. And we haven't really answered the cheerleading question. I mean, we've decided that she's not going to do it because, if anything, he said no, obviously, of course not. We're not doing it because it would keep us from worship. Out of all of the reasons, it would keep us from worship on Sundays, and that is the foremost important thing that we do out of our week. And so if it cuts into that time, then it gets cut itself. So we're bye cheerleading. Bye. Sorry. Can't say we're gonna miss you, but bye. Right. We'll miss you though. Hit the subscribe button. We hope to see you next time. You know, you can follow me on Instagram over here. I've actually been having a lot of good conversation with people.
Have you really?
Yes, I told you some of them.
Oh, those are from Instagram.
Yeah, and Facebook.
Gotcha.
Facebook or Instagram. So give me a follow here. We'd love to hear any of your thoughts or opinions about this, and we'll see you next time. Hey, welcome back to Small Town on Purpose.
Let's try that again.
Another intro?
Shorter.
Okay.
We have 25 minutes.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to Small Town on Purpose.
What are you doing? I was talking and you just went into
That was my practice.
I can't edit that.
Okay. Should we just cut this?
Huh?
Should we just get rid of this one?
Sure.
Delete it?